Hi, everyone. So I hope you're all well. This is very strange and sad and distressing times out there. And Nikki, Dave, and I talked about whether it was appropriate to keep going and keep going live in a time like this when there's so many things to acknowledge and listen to and understand from the world around us. But we felt that we do provide, I think, some kind of refuge for people and something that's needed for people throughout COVID and now throughout these times of protest. And it doesn't do any disrespect to those out there bringing important messages to light, but we wanted to make sure that we kept serving our community who did need a place of refuge and some respite in moments where we get to focus on music, something that can bring us together, something that can bring us solace in very confusing times. If you told me that there'd be an 8 p.m. curfew in New York City because of rioting in the streets, I would have been very surprised. I am very surprised. In any case, that's why I've decided to continue to go live, and I hope that makes our case clear. Today, I would like to talk about some left-hand techniques, and that little piece I played at the beginning was I tried to incorporate all of the different techniques we'll be talking about. I cannot go into depth on all 7 of these techniques. We teach them in the academy, but I just want to talk about them and talk about why they bring a lot to our music and some different ways, and often some typical problems that we encounter with them. So before we dive in, I'd like to say hello and acknowledge everyone. Stephen, great to have you. Martha, Lucienne, great to have you again. John from Texas, Michelangelo from Cairo. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining in. I know a lot of you have come to all of these live streams. I really appreciate it. It's actually been in the last coaching call session over the last weekend. It was really nice to have some conversations with people, and they got to directly communicate how much they appreciate these sessions, not necessarily for what I provide, but for the ability to come together and just say hello and gather together, even if it is digitally in a chat box. We will have on Thursday Gary Lee, luthier, wonderful man and a very talented luthier out in New Jersey, great teacher as well. He has a course inside the academy already, which many of you may have seen. And he's going to take us on a tour inside of his workshop. And so I think it'll be a great opportunity to ask some questions and get some interesting insights into the process of making an instrument. I don't know whether he usually is in the midst of building 1 or 2 instruments. So perhaps we will be able to see some works in progress. So great to have everyone saying hello there in the chat and kind words there as well, because it's very international in our community. So I can only imagine so many different perspectives and stories and approaches to it. But let's dive in. So we had a session where we talked about 7 right-hand techniques. And I would say that those techniques are actually a little more on the exotic side. They were fun to explore. And when I was talking to Nikki and Dave this morning in our weekly meeting, I asked them, did they have any suggestions about what I should be talking about this afternoon? And Nikki very rightfully suggested 7 left-hand techniques. And so I wanted to go over some techniques. None of these are going to be particularly exotic. I think these are probably quite familiar. But I want to talk about some ways that they can bring life to our music, bring some variety and diversity to our music, and maybe some common issues that come up along with them too. Because I think it's the most important one, I want to deal with vibrato first. So vibrato is, in my opinion, the most underused technique on the classical guitar, yet one of the most impacting techniques. If you ever get a chance to watch a great cellist, Pablo Casals, Yo-Yo Ma, Jacqueline Dupre, you will see them using vibrato a lot. I mean, it's not just for cellists, but when I think of great vibrato, I think of cello players, perhaps because it's in a similar range to the classical guitar. And I think great classical guitarists also use a lot of vibrato, but it's something that's quite neglected for many stages in development. It can be a little hard to integrate initially, and there's a couple of hurdles along there as well, but I would highly recommend that you devote some energies of integrating vibrato into your playing. So, I was just playing around a simple melody before in E minor. It's on the 5th string, which is always reminds me of the Villa-Lobos Prelude No. 1, who he himself was a cellist. And if we play this little line, that's what we would call in singing terms straight tone. And I think a lot of the time that's how we play on the guitar, perhaps because there's so many other challenges and demands to consume our attention. But vibrato can add such life to the sound and variety and interesting textures, and it can sustain the note as well. This is a pretty resonant note that has sympathetic resonance on the instrument, but you can hear, because we're oscillating the string, we're getting a bit of energy put in there from the vibrato. It actually sustains the note a little bit more. So we can get quite a singing sound with vibrato. So here's a couple of things I want to point out about vibrato. I'm not going to take you through my standard spiel about how to play vibrato. I want to talk about a couple of things that are often overlooked. So the first one is continuing the vibrato. So if we have a note where we play the vibrato, it's often we think, okay, play vibrato, and then it stops, and then we continue on, right? But there's a real skill to being able to have the vibrato sound and continue it as we go to different notes. As opposed to, right, just a small sort of shake, if you will, and then stopping again. That is a challenge. Once you've got the hang of vibrato, the next step really is to be able to continue that vibrato. And you can use a scale fragment, a full scale, a scale fragment, whatever you like. Obviously, it's not going to work on open strings, but I think that's the first step with vibrato. The next one is being able to vary your vibrato. Often, when people start using vibrato, they have one speed, and often it's quite fast, because I feel that they want to get the effect, and the way to get the effect is to use as much strength as possible. But as you get more familiar and comfortable with the actual technique, you'll find that we can have varying types of vibrato that really bring life to the note. So we could have slow, we could have moderate in the middle, or you could have fast. Sometimes called tight vibrato. Maybe tight would be, right? Sounds tight, sounds agitated and energetic, and that might be great for, something where it has a lot of energy and you want to communicate that energy, whereas something more languorous, maybe it's slow and sort of pulsating. So mastering the ability to change the speed of your vibrato would be another step there. So we've got the continuation of vibrato, and then the speed. Right? So those are things that are going to bring a great deal of sophistication to your vibrato. And then lastly, as I sort of showed you a little bit before, it's actually doing vibrato on more than one note. As you can see in some of the examples, I was using my other fingers on the same string to kind of grip that string in the process. But it is possible to do vibrato over entire chords. You know, and part of it is getting it on the melody. This is the tiny little part of Romanza. But we can also integrate that into our barre, into full chords. And it just brings a whole nother sound world to our notes. So those are the three little elements about vibrato I'd like you to consider if you're in fact doing that technique already. One is continuing the vibrato between notes. The second is how the oscillations, how fast the vibrato is. And then the last is actually, can we integrate it into chords, holding down vibrato on more than one note? And yes, you absolutely can. It does take, it feels a little weird to start off with. The first hurdle is actually getting the string to go flat and sharp. And then the next hurdles are sort of, as I said, in that order of continuing consistent vibrato, speed, and then on more than one note. But honestly, the biggest hurdle to get over is actually using it in the first place. It's something that we often just sort of push to the side. Maybe we'll add it later. I heard it recommended. It's too hard, in the too hard basket. But highly, highly, highly recommended to integrate as much vibrato as you can into our music. All right, so that was number one, vibrato. I should write numbers. I wrote a list, but I'm going to go out of order. The next one is a left hand staccato. So we often think about staccato as stopping a string with our right hand, simply making a string vibrate and then stopping it again. That's going to stop the sound. Staccato means detached, and so we're detaching the notes. Normally we often aim for legato, so connected, but in the case of staccato, we're making them detached. By stopping the string vibrating with our right hand, we're detaching those notes from sounding. The left hand, if we have a fretted note, that is not an open string, we can also detach those notes by lifting our left hand and just gently letting it rise. We don't have to lift it off the string. You might get a slur sound there, but it's lifting it slightly off the string so that it stops sounding. So it's almost like we're lifting it up to mute the sound. Now you can, depending on how fast you lift up your finger here, you can get a little bit of buzz between the place of pressing the note down and lifting it up. And you can play around with that depending how clean you want the staccato to sound. The other thing you can play around with is the duration of the notes. Because if you imagine two tennis balls, for instance, you could have, no, that's not a good example. Well, let's say tennis balls might be a good example for a short or like a very detached, right? And then you think of two bricks. I'm really mixing my ideas here. But two bricks, there's still a division between them, but there's not such a division. They're closer, right? So we can play around with how much these notes are detached. So this would be just slightly detached. Well, this would be legato. No detachment, other than the right hand finger going through the string. Now I might detach them just slightly. I'm just lifting up my finger slightly to mute that string. Now I'm going to detach them even more. Now I'm going to make it very, very short. Right? So it's all about how quickly I'm releasing my finger in the left-hand staccato. These are ways for us to create slightly different characters, slightly different effects. And the most intriguing communication of this came from Ricardo Gallen, who's a phenomenal Spanish guitarist. I interviewed him on the podcast if you want to have a listen to a conversation with him. And he actually went to the extent of talking about mapping out or practicing staccato and right hand connection with the strings in terms of 30-second notes, or partitioning it down to very small divisions where we might think, basically be able to differentiate between a dotted 16th note with a 16th note rest, or an 8th note. But these are 16th notes, and he went all the way down to 30-second notes, which is very, very small gaps. So something to think about. So that would be left hand staccato. That's using the left hand to detach these notes. All right, that's number 2. And I will have some time for questions at the end of all this. So if you have any questions, I'll be going through the comments. Right, the next one, this one's an interesting one, Portamento. I guess we could put that in with glissando as well, but I want to talk about ways we can use this to be more musical. So basically we're talking about the finger being down as we move. Often we will play a note, lift, and play another note. Or we will play a note, stay on the string, but not make any sound. Right? Those are 2 very common ways of shifting between places. If, however, we keep some of that pressure down on the string, we get notes as we shift. Now this effect, while quite easy to make, is something that can be very varied, and I think it's important to be able to practice the weight and the way we use the weight in our fingers. A concept brought to me, well, before we get to that, let's just talk about heavy versus light, right? So if we're going from G natural to B, now I've kept the weight very heavy. You start to hear the divisions in between, you even hear the frets. Right? But it's a very pronounced effect. If I kept it light, it's so softer, right? And the speed is going to affect that as well. So heavy and fast. It's kind of like again, it's a caricature effect. And then fast and light, very much more delicate. It still has a different character again. Right now we've been doing it so that the portamento will actually sound the note at the top there. But what if we resound it with our finger? That's again another effect. Like, do you actually use the left hand to make the final note, or do you resound it with the right hand? It's something that will make a difference between the 2 characters that we bring out. But what I wanted to talk about was a concept that was communicated, I first came across it by Raphaëlle Smits, who is a phenomenal Belgian guitarist. She lives in Antwerp, I believe, teaches in Leuven in Belgium. And she talked about the idea of increasing weight as we approach the destination of the portamento, because often we don't want a consistent amount of note as we shift, right? It sounds a little bit like a caricature. It's a little bit comical, like a special effect. But really what we want to emulate, the way I think about it, is a singer, yum, yum, right? Where we get actually kind of a tapered entry into a note. Right? So it's an effect. Or maybe instead of that's very different to that, which is a little more vocal, a little more subtle, and I really prefer that. So the way I'm doing that is I'm playing the note, and I will start shifting, but I'm putting very little weight, and I'm increasing the weight of the finger as I get towards my destination. You can actually get a crescendo. Right? It's a really lovely way. There's all sorts of different ways to play it. But as you can see, kind of like vibrato, we don't want to be satisfied with just one way to play it. It can bring a great deal of variety and character to whatever we're playing. So you can play around with the weight, the speed, and then maybe even experiment with that tapered sort of crescendo to the final note with your left-hand portamento. So that is number 3. Number 4. Now this one really, Dave mentioned this to me in the meeting as a suggestion, but I'm not 100% sure I understood him correctly, but left-hand harmonics. So I think what he meant by that, is just natural harmonics, where our placement of the finger for harmonics. And the real thing to think about here is really accuracy of placement, the amount of flesh that we're using on the string, and also the way we release the finger off the string. It's very much a timing issue with the release. If you leave your finger on, you still get a harmonic and it still can sound, but you're muting ever so slightly, or sort of subduing that oh, Dave was saying that was Nikki's suggestion. In any case, the natural harmonics, we want to really be careful about our placement, the release of the finger, and that timing and accuracy has everything to do with those notes. Of interest is the fact that when we get harmonics at the 12th fret, harmonics at the 7th fret, and harmonics at the 5th fret, they're actually very, very accurately above the fret wire. They're not either side, they're above the fret wire. However, as we start to get out of those common harmonics, we actually find that the point that we need to touch the nodal point on is actually off the fret wire. So if you want to get a C sharp here, slightly out of tune C sharp because it's in mean tuning, it's actually on the headstock side of the fret. Same as if you were to find the same note on the 9th fret, it's slightly behind that fret. You can actually find harmonics all up and down the string. If you've ever heard, there's an effect that often comes up in electric guitar. Right? That's just finding different harmonic points along that string. But the 4th fret harmonic and the 9th fret, which are the same notes, are actually found behind the fret. And you might find some other examples of that as well. So very accurate placement, very good timing as you lift the finger off, and being aware that the placement of the finger is a little bit different on harmonics that are not on the 5th, 7th, or 12th fret. Okay, we are going through these rather quickly. Okay, number 5, I want to look at slurs. Now, it's kind of a big topic to teach and a lot of things to develop, but I particularly want to touch on descending slurs and two different ways to play that, right? So I find, this might be old news to some of you, but I find that if it's not old news, it can be very useful. So basically, and this is a term that Rene Izquierdo sort of used, and I think it's a wonderful term, thinking of slurs in the left hand as both free stroke or rest stroke. So I often, when teaching slurs, talk about the fact that we want to think of almost playing the string like we would play it with our right hand. And we can come down to the fretboard and even touch it and rest on this next string. This would be the equivalent to a rest stroke slur. So playing the note with the right hand and then actually going down and across into the fretboard. We might not always have a very dramatic push into the fretboard, but it gives you an interesting idea about the direction. If we were to do a free stroke slur, we would be more lifting the finger off and clearing the next string. Now, the important thing about these slurs is they feel different and they sound a little different as well. So we might find use for those movements in different situations. You also might find that they're slightly easier in some difficult situations. I often find that the rest stroke slur is very much easier for 4/3 combinations or any kind of challenging finger combinations there on the left hand. The other thing that I often suggest with these slurs is to add a little bit of counter pressure with the finger that's holding down this following note. So as you can see with the rest stroke slur, we're kind of actually putting a lot of energy into the string. And if we don't offer some counter pressure, we can actually bend. We can pull the string quite a lot. So if you offer a little bit of counter pressure with the other finger, so pushing the other direction, you'll see even the string gets a little bent there. Gives us actually much more of a flick feeling as the finger leaves. I'm exaggerating here, so it's distorting the sound. But you can see that it helps to add a little bit of tension to the string, which helps the slur. So those are three things that I wanted to bring your attention to with slurs. One is this free stroke versus rest stroke slur. The other is the counter pressure that we can encounter in descending slurs. All right. I'm already up to number 6. We'll have to come up with some more. The number 6 is about the positioning of the left hand. Again, a relatively large topic that we could talk about many different facets, but one aspect I seem to come up talking about this many times in coaching calls, is the idea of bringing the elbow and wrist and movement of the hand into our left hand positioning. So a pair of notes that come up in our repertoire often in this situation is to do with the D and the F sharp that comes up in the minuet. Well, you know, this minuet by Petzold. And we get this D and F sharp towards the end of the first section. Now D and F sharp held down by 4 and 3 can be a little bit of a tricky pair of notes to find, especially if you're coming from over here, right? So if you're playing some notes up here and your fingers are all up here, and you try and reach with your fingers, it can be quite difficult to clear the string, and also just to basically find those notes accurately with two fingers that like to misbehave a lot. So what I suggest is actually to bring in rotation into the hand. Now, what you can do if you have a guitar with you, just to get the feeling of this, is we're going to, well, let's start out by just, having our sort of C-shape position with the hand. And I want you just to bring your elbow in like it's following an arc, keeping the hand completely stationary, really. All we're moving is the elbow. And that's the kind of feeling I want you to engage with. The next thing would be to think that your first finger is fixed in space and we're actually rotating around. Is that working? Yeah, around that position. Okay. Now let's take that. I'll ask you to put your first finger on A, right, on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, and then maybe you can just lightly play C on the 5th fret of the 3rd string, just to get our bearings, right? Now, if you keep that first finger locked and see if you can use your elbow, your arm movement, to move your 4th finger from the 6th to the 1st string. This is the kind of movement I'm talking about with our left hand position. By moving your 4th finger across over this D, it's a lot easier and more accurate to get those notes to go from, as opposed to this, doing it all with the fingers. Now don't get me wrong, we're not going to completely rely on the elbow to do that. We often use a mixture. Well, the fingers will move and the arm will move. But as you can see, it really helps get the fingers over there so that they don't have to do all the work by themselves. Now you'll find also that we can have the inverse and having the elbow move out. Right? You can do this just to really feel extremes of this kind of movement. And the reason this comes up quite a bit is I think we get very much locked into this parallel position that we work so hard to get in early stages, and we kind of get locked into that a little bit. So we want to have the freedom to start letting the hand feel free to rotate, but also have the confidence that our development so far has given us this stable position we can always come back to. It's very much like your sitting position where you might distort things for particular moments, Look at this position. know, it's all out. The thumb's way over on the edge. My fourth finger's all straight. But yes, and then, and we're back. You know, you're always coming back to that home position that's ergonomic and comfortable and facilitates playing. But we can have plenty of moments where we do some strange things with our positioning. As long as we return to home base, it should be fine. So just something to think about there with our left hand positioning. Integrating the elbow into that kind of movement can be really, really useful. Okay, and last, this is the topic that everyone always wants to talk about is the barre. And I did talk about this a little bit in another, I think the Q&A session I talked about this. But the one concept I wanted to open up to you is that it's something that often triggers an aha moment for people, and that is the idea, one, that we can use the side of the finger instead of having it flat. We can actually roll onto the side to hold down those notes. And the other is going to be about the thumb sort of in a C shape that we can turn, and it acts as a different type of leverage. So it's not back behind. It's not back behind the fret, but rather it's, let's say my finger barre is on the 5th fret, the thumb might be behind the 6th, or even, more like the 6th fret, right? So you actually get a bit of, the fingers look like they have a C shape if I were to take it away from the instrument. But it's different, far less squeezing effect in the hands. The feeling I want you to have in the arm is not one of, this is what tends to happen in people's arms when they do go flat on the barre. Underneath, first of all, you'll see all the lines underneath the finger, and you'll feel it. Maybe your shoulder will be contracting, and I think people can get a lot of pain in their forearms. However, if you go on the side and you sort of use this sort of C shape to get that weight from the arm, you start to use different muscles. You can maybe just experiment, even if this is old news. Maybe if you're a teacher, you can experiment with how it feels between the two. You're using quite different muscles, and I believe this has been very helpful for me and for other people that I've worked with. I know that there are plenty of people who do it a little differently, so I'm not saying it's the only way, but it does start to use very different muscles that I believe are stronger and don't fatigue as much. You can feel it underneath your armpit on the side. I can feel it in my trapezius muscle down my back. I'm not feeling it in my forearm at all, and you can feel it a bit in your bicep as well. So that's something that I often find does help people with their barre technique. So that actually comes to the end of our 7 short points there of the left hand technique that I wanted to touch upon. And this might be a good opportunity to ask some questions now about that, because I'm sure there might be some questions. I see Mr. Duncan Gardner in the chat. Hi, Duncan. Duncan's a phenomenal guitarist and performer and composer who's living in Queensland, Australia right now. Hi, Duncan. Good to see you. Does anyone have any questions about those 7 points? We talked about vibrato, left-hand staccato, portamento, left-hand harmonics, slurs, left-hand position, and the barre. So Martha asked, could you clarify the difference, if any, between portamento and glissando? Good question, Martha. I'm always a little bit, hey, you know, I have my little Harvard dictionary here. I'm always a little, I need to have this in my brain as well. So let's have a look. Feel free as well if you want to offer up, if you feel, if you want to know the answer. Oh, I have to learn my alphabet. Here we go. Glissando. Okay. I have the feeling they might be synonyms. Glissando, a continuous or sliding movement from one pitch to another. On the piano, the nail of the thumb or the third finger or the side of the index finger is drawn. So like when you've seen them do that, that's a glissando. On stringed instruments, such as the violin, on wind instruments, the sliding movement may produce a continuous variation in pitch rather than a rapid succession of discrete pitches. Yeah, so that's pretty much what we did. Now let's compare that to portamento. Portamento, P-O-R. Portamento, a continuous movement from one pitch to another through all of the intervening pitches, without, however, sounding these discretely. It is principally an effect in singing and string playing, though for the latter and for other instruments capable of such an effect, the term glissando is often used. It does. I have to go back to glissando. It says, for a distinction between these effects, see glissando. All right. Let's head on back to G. I did such a good job of finding P. All right, hopefully this is worth it, because it sounds like they're pretty much the same thing. Okay, here we go. Some writers okay, I'm going to read from here. On stringed instruments such as the violin, on wind instruments, particularly though not exclusively the slide trombone, and on pedal kettle drum, the sliding movement may produce a continuous variation in pitch rather than a rapid succession of discrete pitches. This is often indicated by a straight or wavy line drawn between the starting and ending pitches and is sometimes termed portamento, though glissando remains the prevalent term for this effect in musical scores. Some writers have preferred to restrict the meaning of glissando to the motion in which discrete pitches are heard, interesting, reserving portamento for continuous variation in pitch. But the musical practice is not consistent in this respect. Ambiguity in the use of the term glissando is most likely to occur with respect to stringed instruments, which is capable of both effects. All right, so a little bit of so from what I'm gathering in that, if we're going to be very specific, glissando, I'm hearing the partitions, whereas portamento is a bit more of a smooth transition. But I think in practice, they kind of mean the same thing. Very rarely, I think, do we really want to sound out the frets in these slides. But hopefully that was of interest. Donna asked, can vibrato be overused like rolling chords is often overused? Absolutely. However, I've never seen it overused. So that's why I say, please, please, please use more vibrato, because guitarists just don't use it very much at all. So I'm sure it can be overused, overdone, but I've yet to see that. Lucienne, I was just saying very helpful. I'm glad it was helpful. Drew, hi Drew. Can you comment on tension and relaxation in the left hand? Yes, I mean, it's obviously tension and relaxation is crucial to having stamina and endurance in our playing. And often it becomes an issue with Barre playing. And there's a couple of elements that affect that. One is going to be learning how to use the least amount of energy and weight and effort and squeeze the least. And that is definitely something to be learned, because we often use too much pressure. I might actually on Thursday ask Mr. Gary Lee about this project he's been involved in with the Peabody School. They were creating a guitar with this fretboard that actually mapped out how heavy the pressure is. And it would be interesting to see how it works with a heat map of pressure. But we can often get away with a lot less pressure in our left hand. And so one thing I like to do is actually try and find as many moments as we can to relax. But sometimes pieces are just hard. There's barres, there's lots of things. So finding as many moments where we can release the hand. For example, I was working with someone on the romanza the other day, and there's a lot of barres here. Can we try and let go of any tension here? And then we have some more barres and things. But in that little moment, we can try and release as much tension as we can. It's often the sustain of tension in the hand that can wear us out. So sometimes we do need to have a bar chord on B flat on the first fret. It just takes a lot of effort, more effort than normal. But letting go of that strain and tension when we can, and those little micro moments, is going to be key. There is, in addition to that, some endurance that we need to build up. Usually it's more to do with novices and beginners, because it's new movements that they're getting used to. James, James said, I saw a video of Pepe Romero teaching a student to start the vibrato slowly and increase the speed through the note. Yes, I didn't mention this, but this definitely, we talked about speed of slow or fast. We can actually have, right? Right, a bit faster. So that's something to consider as well. It's another variation of vibrato there. Lots of questions coming in here. Carlos sort of asked about how much do I see it as using the weight of the arm versus the thumb. Very much the arm. I actually play a fair bit without, how can you see it, without the thumb. Like I can play definitely entire pieces. I don't know if you can see it. Barres. Still off. I mean, it feels a little weird because I don't obviously normally do that, but I don't use the thumb for pressure very much at all. I mean, there's going to be a couple of cases, maybe a barre on the first fret or something, I might be squeezing a little bit, but this isn't going to last you very long. This muscle, maybe, is there muscle there? Maybe a little bit, or in the forearm. It's not going to give you much endurance. The bigger muscles are going to give you a lot more endurance for playing throughout pieces. So I really do think of weight of the arm and the larger muscles. I don't want to give you a percentage, but it's a lot more than I would ever use of the fingers. Any suggestions on moving into a barre position quickly? Well, this is a wonderful exercise. Have a look at it on the YouTube channel for Classical Guitar Corner. It's by Rene Izquierdo, and he basically it looks like. I think that exercise would be great at getting into the barre position. I think it's like many things, familiarity, refinement of position and movement. Just know that the barre is one of those things that gives a lot of people a struggle. It's a hurdle sort of into intermediate territory. Sometimes it takes a matter of months, and once it's there, it's there. So I think just some time and familiarity there. But have a look at that video. Stephen asked, do you ever use a sort of half vibrato? I'm interested in pushing and pulling the tone. It's not so much a continual movement, right? But half of that. So I think Stephen might be talking about kind of a distortion almost. It's a bit like a special effect. Yes, we absolutely would. I think maybe on sort of moments of distortion, just have a bit of fun, or maybe other, like kind of, you can bend the pitch. That's what vibrato really is, it's just bending the pitch. So yes, but it's a little bit of a special effect. So Marco was saying that he thought the gliss is when you don't strike the arriving note with the right hand, and the portamento is the opposite. So, gliss and portamento. So I don't know if those have two different names about resounding or sounding the arrival note. I don't know. Can I? I don't. Sorry, the comments from Facebook. Most of the people are on YouTube in these sessions, and the comments from Facebook come up as unknown a lot of the time. Can you tell me the differences between Carcassi and Shearer? And so, I mean, these are very different worlds. Shearer wrote a very outstanding modern method in the 20th century, and Carcassi one in the sort of 18th century, 19th century. I mean, there's a huge difference in approaches. I don't really have the ability to sort of compare and contrast their methods, but starkly different approaches and over a century of pedagogical material. So I think you're talking about their pedagogical material, I would assume. Donna said, so is this correct regarding releasing tension to take the left hand slightly off the fretboard for a bit and let the tension go? No, what I mean is that we'll say we had this moment again in Romanzo. this is a tension-inducing barre with some stretches and fourth finger movement. And then we get here, right? Just as if you might take yoga or do any kind of relaxation exercise, and you find points of tension you didn't even realize were there, and you'll release them, right? So often we come from this and we go back to here. We keep holding on to that tension, and that's what wears us out, right? So we keep going. You're not letting go, but we want to let go, because we can use such less energy in the left hand to execute that one note as opposed to holding down that 6-string barre. So hopefully that makes it a little clearer. Judy. Well, Charles asked a very easy question. Charles asked about how does one learn about these live shows ahead of time? Well, there's two things. One, we do them regularly 4 p.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays each week. That's East Coast US time. And also you can go to classicalguitarcorner.com/live. And I actually send out an email that day just saying the topic of the stream and what time. But you can also just know it's 4 p.m. So hopefully that helps. And most people are on the Classical Guitar Corner YouTube channel. That's where the majority of the questions come in. Often people say, where are all these questions coming in? I don't see anybody. Question came in, is there an exercise to develop the extension between the third and fourth fingers of the left hand? Yes. Yes, there is, but you won't like it. Let me tell you, this exercise, oh gosh, there's too many books and glasses of water. Oh, we made it. Okay, let me tell you where it is. This was an exercise shown to me by Dale Kavanagh. As you can see, like I often say, there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of these things I've been taught, very fortunately, through all my experiences at different universities and masterclasses and whatnot. This was from Dale and her husband, Thomas Kirchhoff, run a festival in Iserlohn. And anyway, so this is from a technique class 15 years ago there. So it's this is on page 78 of the 20 practice routines. It's a simple concept. This is a major 7th shape. And basically we're going to extend one finger at a time as we place arpeggios. And unlike many exercises, this exercise gets dramatically more challenging the slower you play it, because you have to hold these stretches for longer periods of time. There's that 3/4 stretch. And obviously as it gets down here, it's a much bigger stretch. Recommend taking your time on that. It can be a damaging exercise, but I found it when done diligently and patiently. I've worked with a student who went to Manhattan School of Music, and that actually really fixed his issue very well. That was more between 2 and 3 rather than 3 and 4, but everyone's got their own things. Great. Yeah, I think it probably wraps up the questions. I saw a funny comment there. Mark Cohen, hi Mark, said he bought the Leisner books just for the pics, and it's a little probably an inside joke. I took the photos for that book. David Leisner is a friend and colleague, and he lives down on the Upper West Side, and we did photos in my living room. So it's a small world in classical guitar, and that's kind of the beautiful thing. So we might even get an early mark today. I feel like I got through those points rather quickly. As I said, we're going to be talking to Gary Lee on Thursday, and he's a luthier, and I think that was going to be a great opportunity to ask a luthier questions. So maybe if you have any questions, I'm wondering, no, I don't think I can show him pictures, but yeah, maybe if you have any questions, I think it's been a great opportunity, and he's going to show us around his workshop. Yeah, so maybe some of you can, if you're in the academy, you can watch his masterclass on guitar construction, and then we might have some really nice questions to follow on from that those lessons. So Well, we might wrap things up for today. Thank you very much for coming in. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was maybe sparked some inspiration of some techniques to use to spice up your repertoire. Yeah, I'll see you all on Thursday. You know what I'll do? I will end with a little the same thing I played at the beginning, where I tried to use all these techniques in a piece, just noodling around in a piece of music. So, at my list, you can call them out if you yell out loud enough. Maybe I'll hear through the screen. There it is. All right. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.